Hey there, members of the Night Crew, and folks who just love horror. Welcome to the Night Crew podcast, where shadows breathe and monsters listen. This is the podcast where we get cozy with the creepy, the frightening, and the just plain undead. I'm your host, Brad Ricks. Before we get started tonight, a couple of quick housekeeping items like usual. If you've been enjoying the show, there's an easy way to show it. Subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave a rating if you've got 30 seconds to spare, and share an episode with someone just as crazy as we all are. Also, join my Facebook group. There'll be a link in the show notes, or just go to Facebook and search for Brad Ricks' Book Crypt. You can also follow the show on Facebook by looking up the Night Crew podcast. And did I mention I'm on TikTok? It's Brad Ricks Author over there. One word, no spaces. Now, on today's episode, I'm super excited to have someone I've known for a few years now. I sat down with Andrew Najberg. He's the author of such works as Mobius Door, Gollitok, and Eat the Light. He's also part owner of Wicked House Publications, and he also has a board game coming out. We talk about his journey from poetry to horror, what it's like being co-owner and co-editor of a publishing company, and why horror is one of the most powerful genres. Into the virtual studio we go. All right, well, tonight I'm thrilled to have Andrew Najberg joining me. Andrew, how are you this evening?
Doing fantastic. How about yourself, man?
I am doing well. I'm actually super excited for us to chat. You know, we've kind of known each other for a couple of years now, so it's gonna be fun to sit back and have a nice, fun conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for hopping on. So one thing for audience members that I do want to say, so Andrew is not only an author in his own right. He's got some great books that we're going to talk about, but he is also the co-owner and co-editor-in-chief of Wicked House. So we're also going to be able to dive into some of those pressing publishing questions that, I know people always are. It's kind of the black box that we don't ever see as the author. So being able to kind of pry those doors back a little bit, it's going to be fun too. So I hope you are ready. So, all right. So I will start with some of my normal stuff. So tell me a little bit about, from your writing journey, how long have you been writing? What made you want to hop into the crazy world of typing words on a page?
So I've been writing a really long time, and it depends on how you look at it. Like, I've been writing stories, poems, and things like that for fun since about third grade. Story I always tell folk is that my sister was very self-conscious growing up, and she actually had a little phase where she wanted to write as well. She actually was really into Mad Magazine, and she loved the idea of writing parodies and stuff. And she wanted to work on that, but she also was very uncomfortable with herself, and so she didn't want to do it alone, because she would have felt strange doing it by herself. So she locked me in her room with her and forced me to write. That way, we could read back and forth what we were working on, and that, she felt like, she had company for it. And, I actually, at the time, I was in third grade. I didn't know what to write. So I wrote the transcript of the movie Aliens out from memory. This was 1987, and I'd seen it probably 40 or 50 times at that point. It was my favorite movie even then. Now I've seen it like 500-600 times. The neat part about it though is, I'd never really written anything as a kid aside from a couple little classroom assignments that were, half a poem or something like that. Mm-hmm. And turning out I wrote good 100 pages of it. And, it was by hand, which, took a while. And I was pretty proud of just accomplishing that length of material. And it just really started getting me thinking about how fun it is to put words on a page. Then I was also really fortunate where, I was fairly advanced for my age in a lot of studies and stuff. And my teachers kind of knew that. And so, because I really just was never interested in thinking about the things that the class was, they pretty much let me do whatever I wanted, because if they didn't, I was actually extremely disruptive. So,
Jose, now, as a teacher yourself now, if you had a student like you, how would you address that?
So It's a little bit tricky to answer that. Not really because of like teaching responsibility or something like that, but because I do teach college. And when you get to the level that I'm instructing at, generally speaking, you're rarely going to have students who are coming fully equipped with the knowledge that your class is designed to work with. And a chunk of what they're learning comes through practice and production during the class. And so the way I would put it is this theory. If somebody were to be able to simply not come to class and turn in work that exceeded the expectations of the standards that I set for the class without attending, showcasing all of the skills that those assignments are meant to give you, I wouldn't care if they didn't come. At that point, they've already completed the education. They're probably in my class because they need it for some very
need the credit.
Yeah, no, exactly. Maybe it just fills a graduation requirement. The truth is, though, that very rarely comes at that level. When you're talking about third, fourth, fifth grade and that kind of thing, I mean, it's a lot more manageable. We'd have reading class, for example, and kids would be reading, half a page and then the next kid would read. And I was a very fast reader. And honestly, it would just drive me absolutely batshit crazy to be sitting there waiting for people to read steadily. I didn't do the voice inside my head thing. I just read and comprehended. And so I'd read the whole story during the first student, and then I'd be 2 or 3 stories ahead in the book. And then they'd call on me and I'd be like, I have no idea what we're doing. And for a while, I would get in trouble for it, but eventually, because I would get really great test scores, I'd get, great scores on standardized tests. I did tests into like gifted programs and stuff like that. Yeah, they largely let me do what I wanted. And part of it too is what I wanted was always applied. I wasn't just sitting there goofing off. Like I would literally be sitting there drawing something fairly difficult, or I'd be, writing a short story, or I'd be reading, a book. Like I would bring Stephen King books to school sometimes and things like that.
In the fourth grade?
Or the Lord of the Ring. Actually in fourth grade, I started reading King. Like Eyes of the Dragon was a favorite of mine at that point.
That's a good one.
Like I was trying to read The Stand in fifth grade. That was a challenge. But I read The Gunslinger, actually, strangely enough, in third or fourth. But no, I was reading Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff too, and things like that. Because I was on task, because I would also know the material whenever the tests came, I was left pretty autonomous. But then I would also share my work with the teachers too. And I had a lot of teachers who were really greatly encouraging about it. So, I'd get really positive feedback on stories or constructive criticism. That helped a lot. But then, when I got to college, I actually declared as a computer science major. I made it all the way. I'd been working as an intern for a hospital chain in their computer department. So I'd had some hardware training already. And then, I took actually all the way through my junior year, 1 year at Baylor and then 2 years at UTK. And when I transferred to UTK, though, their department kind of lied to me. And they told me that credits had been approved for transfer that had not. And the courses were not the actual equivalents they claimed they were in order to get me to come over there. And as a result, I discovered I was going to have to retake an entire year of classes to be on the same page as their classes. And the frustrating part is that I had learned C, which at the time was the industry standard. They were still training on C. And so not only that, but I would have also been taking an educational step back. And so I actually got really frustrated with the program. And at the same time, I'd taken an advanced poetry workshop with a fellow named Dr. Arthur Smith. And I absolutely loved the hell out of that class. It's still just sort of set the benchmark for what I thought a great class should be. And because I was having so much discord with the computer science program, I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to, I love writing. I think I could do this. And so, I switched over majors and next semester took a poetry and a fiction class. And I met my fiction mentor there, Michael Knight, who was just absolutely fantastic. And while I was at UTK, I took 6 classes with Art Smith and I think 4 with Michael Knight, a couple more with author named Alan Wire, got to work with a poet named Jack Gilbert. And then actually, curiously enough, I got to study under Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love. And that was before she'd written that. It was actually right before she was writing it while she was teaching us, which was sort of interesting. But no, basically at that point, I got really, really committed to the writing track. I loved spending my time doing it. I actually really struggled at the time with fiction. Poetry was my natural inclination in school. And so I spent 20 years after graduating publishing poems. I've got about I don't know, 100 or so journal publications in poetry, won a couple national awards, got two collections and a chapbook out. I built a pretty decent resume in it, or CV. The thing is I hate to put it this way because this sounds so crass, but poetry doesn't pay. And I have kids. I have a wife. Basically, in order to really pursue writing in the way that I was wanting to, an income was necessary. It had to contribute something to the house. Right. It couldn't just be like this drain. And poetry. You go and do a reading somewhere and you get a hotel and you sell 7 copies and, you maybe bring in like $125 and, you lose $125 or $200 on travel costs. And it becomes this drain. It just feels like a self-indulgent hobby at that point. And I hate to say it that way because I love writing poems and I love reading poems. I think it's an amazing craft, but the readership and support just isn't there right now. And so at the same time, because I do love storytelling, I was working on a first one really long novel. It was sort of a sci-fi action novel about an island that was about a fellow who gets stranded on an island surrounded by this wall of perpetual storm. It's like the island was stuck in the middle of a hurricane whose eye never moved. And the storm slowly constricted on the island. It was a fun story in its own way, but it was brutally terribly bloated and unstructured. I think the longest version came out to like 210,000 words, which I aggressively hacked down to 165 for what I thought was sort of a final draft. And then I realized just how weak the voice of it was and started trying to rewrite it. But then by that point, I really wasn't into that story anymore. And so started working on another novel, which eventually became The Neverborn Thief, the YA fantasy book I put out a couple of years ago. But when I wrote the original draft of that book, I was actually really happy with it. It was one of those things where I sat down and I started writing it. I just always felt like I knew what was coming next. And like there were things I figured out in revision, but I never felt so confident writing a longer form story as I did writing that one. And the only problem is YA is really, really hard in terms of moving it. So, you kind of have to hit it with one of the bigger houses in order to really do well in YA, because unfortunately, getting it into schools, getting it into libraries and school libraries is the bread and butter of the genre if you actually really want to sort of make your way in it. So I was sending to agents and I got a couple full manuscript requests, a couple of, they'd tell me that, it's really well written. They really enjoyed the story, but not enough for them to take it. And so I kind of shelved that and, started working on, what was originally called The Limit Men, and, it eventually became, The Mobius Door. And, wrote that one. That one took a good couple of years because, it was a vastly different story when it began. There was this point about, I'd say 80 to 85% into the plot line where I literally just had no ability to bring these stories together. And I was looking at it and I had 2 main families that the story tracked. And there were a couple wild card characters in there as well. But I realized I essentially had 7 main characters, and main characters. And it was a 350 page book. And I was just like, this is not working. The only way I can do this would be to add an entire new act onto it, another third of the length. At that point, the structure, the momentum's not going to work. And so I was like, okay, what happens if I cut this family out and just reassign parts of their parts to other characters and then maybe come up with some side characters to fill the gap? And so I ended up restructuring the whole thing, cutting out about 125, 150 pages of material. And then it finally, kind of worked. And so, I had this full book that I was pretty satisfied with and, started sending it to agents too. And everybody said no. Had a couple, again, express some interest, kind of just like Neverborn Thief, where it was just like, this is well done. I like a lot of things about it, but it's just not what I'm looking for right now. And of course, this is like 2019. It's sort of leading up to when kind of this new push that there is in horror. So maybe that was part of the issue. I had a hard time finding tons of horror agents. I found lots of sort of sci-fi, lots of thriller, apocalyptic. there seemed to be like, if they did, do horror, it was sort of a side note on their sheets. And so I shelled Mobius Door. And then, the pandemic happened while we were in quarantine. I was really, really anxious, especially with the kids. It was definitely super tense times. I got really kind of a little bit paranoid for a bit and started working on Gollitok, which of course is, it's a novel that's entirely about paranoia and mistrust. And I plowed through the first draft of that. It's the fastest I've ever written a book, maybe 3 months from page 1 to completion. And then I did one revision where I did do some restructuring and I added some really crucial chapters at the end. But no, basically about, 5.5 months after composition or after starting drafting, I had what I felt was a really solid manuscript. Started sending that one out as aggressively as I could. And I actually had a lot of decent interest in it. It didn't get taken by any agents, which was definitely frustrating, but I actually had a much larger number interested in this one. And then finally, my family went and this is after things started kind of opening back up. In 21, we ended up deciding to take a trip to Universal Studios. And, so this is the first sort of big family vacation we'd done since my son was born. We got to the hotel at Universal and I checked my email and Gollitok had been taken by this small press, which was super, super cool. I was really excited. And then, at the day we were leaving Universal, I checked my email and the Mobius Door had been accepted. And the Mobius Door was funny because that one, I had honestly, I'd gotten really frustrated with, and like I said, I kind of given up on it. And when I was submitting Gollitok, I saw a couple of other ones that were looking for things that I didn't think fit Gollitok too well. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe I can send Mobius to these places. And so I sent it out to a couple, and one of them was a Facebook ad that little press I'd never heard of. They actually didn't even have a single book to their name yet. But they had a cool logo, and and honestly, it was just like, well, I'd love to get this book out. I spent years writing it. I'd like to see what people think of it. And I'd gotten some pretty good feedback too from folk I'd asked to read it. And so, yeah, I'd sent it to that press, and that press was Wicked House. And, it was like their 5th title. I think it was, shortly after it was signed, Joe Scipione's Mr. Nightmare came out, and I finally got to see sort of what the press was really doing. And I was pretty impressed immediately just by the production quality I saw and the ads that they started putting out for it. And then, I read it right away, and I love Mr. Nightmare. It's a great
series.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, it's such a wonderful introduction to the press. And, I read the Suffering next, and then the Broken Places. Of the original stretch, Down in the Hollow was the last one actually I read. I didn't read that one until about 6 months ago, which I don't know why I put that one off. It's so good.
It's a good book.
And then, while Mobius was getting ready for print, that other press, the one that signed, Gollitok. So I just, I wasn't impressed. Their editing was minimal. They really just did a very light sort of copy edit proofread. And it turned out actually like later when I had a Wicked House editor look at it, they missed a lot. But, we were talking with their cover designer and granted, I'll say they might have been, I don't know what the cover designer would have turned out for Gollitok, so I will give them that. But I wasn't too thrilled with the mock-up sketch he sent in. And then, I was looking at the press's other covers, and they were very weak, just bad covers. And so at that point, Patrick was really trying to fill out his slate, and, he wanted to keep the momentum going for the press. And, Mobius had just released and is doing pretty well. And he was like, you could just contact that other press and see if they'll give you your rights back. And I was just like, can you do that?
He's like, is that a thing?
Yeah, exactly. And I have a friend who I did some editing work with. I was the senior poetry editor for a magazine called Symposium for a little bit. And I met this friend who's an agent. And she's also an editor as well. So I was just like, hey, so in theory, if I wanted to pull this manuscript, is that a thing? And she was like, well, have they done any real work on it? And I was like, they did a light copy edit. And she was like, well, they may ask you to pay for that, but otherwise, you can just send them a letter requesting an amicable termination of the contract. And I was just like, I'll see what happens. Can you show me what one looks like? And she was like, well, yeah, I can help you draft it. And she wrote me the letter, left some blanks for me to fill in. But They said, they were sad about it, but that they understood it was fine. Then, at that point I had 2 books coming through Wicked House, and I was pretty much locked in at that point. And that was really that was kind of the moment where I was just like, okay, I really want to try to see how far this will go. Nice. And that's a long-ass answer to it.
So what brought you into the direction of horror? I mean, I know you said you were reading Stephen King at a young age and stuff. So that's usually is my answer when people say, why did you do horror? I'm like, well, I started reading Stephen King way too damn young. So what led you down that, or what has drawn you to horror?
A couple of different things. There is the simple answer, which is, I watched Alien when I was 4. I used to actually sleep with a wall of stuffed animals on one side of my bed. And then I would sleep up to it because I thought that maybe that would protect me from face huggers that got into my room during the night. I used to also shove a t-shirt or a blanket under the bedroom door in case the blob tried to get under the door. I saw the blob when I was 2 or 3, and it gave me nightmares for years.
Love that movie. Or the old black and white, or the...
Oh, this was the old black and white. We're talking 1982 at this point.
Okay, yeah. So the remake hadn't come out yet by then. Yeah.
No, not at all. I love the remake too, though.
I do too.
I tell people I was raised on horror. My mom and I especially, we used to watch B horror movies all the time. Me and my sister used to watch this. We had a huge horror collection we'd watch. But then I think really as I got older, especially as I started in poetry, one of the things I really like about poetry is its sense of immediacy. And I like its sense of atmosphere. Poetry will, focuses on controlling the reader's experience moment by moment through the entirety of the poem. And I think that's, and then also actually it relies a lot on metaphor, figurative elements, representation of something deeper underneath the surface. And, I think in a lot of ways, horror overlaps very heavily with poetry, especially the actual horror parts. You seek to control the moment by moment to moment experience, sometimes down to describing individual heartbeats in a story or individual breaths or the breaths that we didn't know we were holding. But,
the ever-loving line that you don't mention in the psychological thriller readers group.
Yeah. But no, that moment-to-moment control, I think, is really intrinsic to the idea of horror. And then, you use poetry to navigate a lot of difficult and intense emotions. It's for passions, it's for fears and terrors, it's for grief and loss. And it's only a small step away from horror at that point. The poetry collections that I've won awards for, the stuff in there, I could turn that into a horror story real easy. Because sometimes it deals with brutal and graphic violence. Sometimes it deals with that devastating, horrible loss. Sometimes you take that and you put it in the metaphor of something strange like a monster. It's already there. And so, for me, it was a really natural pivot. It just felt like where my voice was. When I started writing horror stories, I just found it becomes really natural to me.
Nice. Now, do you find yourself as being more of a pantser or a plotter or somewhere in between?
So that's a fun question. I have a stock answer for it, which is that I do tell people I'm massively a pantser. And externally speaking, if you were to look at me from the outside, you'd never think anything otherwise. If you were to watch me during my writing hours, where I sit down at the computer, I literally just sit down at the computer. I read the last couple sentences that I wrote, and then I just start typing. I have no notes. I have no outlines, nothing like that. So the most I have is if you were to scroll to the bottom of my documents, you'll find a few fragments of scenes that are jotted down. Usually it's going to be things centering around a couple pivotal moments that I know are going to come at some point in the story. So I do have
the little 10 poles kind of thing.
Exactly. But otherwise, now here's the thing. So again, on the surface, it really looks like I have absolutely no prep or planning whatsoever. But just for example, every morning I get up at 5:30. I have a few cups of coffee or a pot of coffee. I get my kids up, feed them breakfast, drive them to school. It's a 45-minute drive to school. Usually my kids hijack the phone and they just listen to, to DJ their music in the morning. And I run iterations of the next couple chapters in my head. So I sort of silently talk through dialogue. I go through descriptions that I might want to write. So And when I get to my office, or sometimes I'll drop the kids off and I'll turn on the microphone and I'll dictate a little bit. But otherwise, when I get to my office, I've basically been thinking for about an hour by that point of exactly what I want the next stuff to be. And so I still don't do much beyond that. Like I really don't do a lot of extensive forward planning. With Extinction Dream, early on, I decided on 2 major twists that I wanted the story to have. And Eat the Light, I decided on a single major twist I expected to have. For Gollitok, I had a particular climactic scene that I wanted to write. But that was really about it in terms of forward planning beyond just whatever I was running over my head before sitting down.
Now, I do want to talk about, so I know you've talked about Mobius Door, which I do have a quick question on Mobius Door before I go any further. So when you were talking about how you had a couple characters and it was going to be a little longer if you try to, you didn't want to do the Stephen King approach and just throw a bomb in the room. I think it was with the Stand that he talked about that he had so many characters he didn't know what to do with, so he just got them all together in a room and just threw a bomb in the room.
I mean, I still kind of do that in Mobius Door. I kill off a lot of characters.
There's a lot of death in Mobius Door. That's true.
Yeah. The vast majority of them come to grief at the end. No, I think, really, it wasn't a question of coming up with the fates of the characters. It was a question of the tension of their arcs. And that was where the real issue was. And in order to even see 1 or 2 characters through to the end, I knew I would still, they weren't situated on the map in the place that I need, like the mental map in the place I needed them to be to bring it to any sort of reasonable end. And at that point, I had an entirely different ending in mind too. And so, yeah, when I sat down to look at it, the only way I could get from point A to point B was to strip down to some of the core bones. And really, especially one of the main characters is a fellow named Mason. He was, meant to be the counterpart to this other character who got cut named Chapel. Although if you read Cassandra Satcher's Wicked Universe anthology, you can actually read part of Chapel's story in that book. Yeah, Mason and Chapel were supposed to be counterparts of an entirely separate plot line. And Mason was actually a main character, like where he was half the page space through the first 100 pages. But when I cut him, it gave me so much freedom and flexibility to develop Heather and Micah and Stuart as characters, because suddenly they had all of this space to breathe and I could really drive their characters forward. And they had actually been pretty minimal in the original draft, but building them out really radically transformed how I understood the book, and it just made it massively more effective, I think.
So I will have to say props for remembering your characters' names after so many books. If you asked me to list the characters in Fear Not the Dead, I'd be like, I think one of the main characters' name is Anna. Because after the only ones I know off, by heart is the Night Crew ones, only because I'm still doing those books. So
yeah.
But everybody else, if you ask a character's name, I don't remember them anymore. So good job remembering that one, because Mobius Door came out a number of years ago. Yeah. But speaking of, like your most recent work, so Eat the Light, so that one's set in a post-apocalyptic world and really seen through the eyes of 2 sisters who are trying to kind of figure out what's going on. So what was your inspiration for Eat the Light? And then have you come up with like an elevator pitch yet? Because I don't think there's been like a con or anything since you've started selling that one. So what's your elevator pitch?
I mean, it's, I describe it as 10 Cloverfield Lane meets, Grave of the Fireflies. And, basically I just tell people it's, one day, 2 sisters are playing at home when their father comes home brandishing a shotgun, and he and their mother shepherds them downstairs into a secret, fallout shelter. And, they are locked alone inside, forced to navigate a new reality while the world might be ending around them. In terms of the inspiration for it, actually, that one is kind of funny because a lot of my stories start on page 1. So Mobius Door, Stuart discovering the door was straight up just
right at the beginning
where that story came from. And then in Gollitok, Hamill Ivarka boarding on the rowboat with the ferryman across the channel. That's always been the opening. Literally, actually, I wrote that scene first, sat on it for a week, and was like, okay, how do I turn this into a story? So there was that one. And then Extinction Dream, again, same thing, exact. That was the opening. Neverborn Thief, Connor's shadow being stolen in the night. All of those were opening conception. That's where I started. Eat the Light was a little different. I had this picture of 2 sisters, hiding behind a tree fallen tree with a ferret on top of it. And all three of them were watching a nuclear detonation. And I sat with that for a really long time, actually, probably about a year and a half. I actually, somewhere in my laptop, I've got a file folder for it, actually. It was just this little idea. I forget, it had a totally different title even too. I just sat with it for a while, and I was like, okay, so, how do I tell this story? How do I have these two girls, seeing this scene? And then I realized, I was like, okay, so I don't think realistically they can. Otherwise, I got to deal with, either figuring out what proximity they had to be without having severe radiation poisoning and having to deal with that as my main plot line. And I didn't want that to be the story.
Logistics.
I do, I write fantastical stuff, but I do approach it with a measure of realism. All of my stories have mechanisms that allow plausibility. Extinction Dream is my most heavily researched, of course. And then, Mobius Door pulls from some pretty exotic theories about, multiverse and multidimensional theory and things like that. And Gollitok, of course, deals with non-carbon based life as a sort of a core of its storyline. Yeah, Eat the Light. I loved the image, but I just didn't know how to get there. And then I did have that opening scene come to me of Alyssa scouting out this house, trying to figure out whether it'd be safe for her to break into it or not. And I was like, okay, so if she's doing that, it's after things have fallen apart. She's scavenging for food. I'm a huge fan of The Road. That's another major influence on that one. But I also didn't want to write The Road with little girls. That was, I needed to come up with something different. So I was like, okay, it can't just be people. And, these girls they're hiding in darkness. And so, what's going to be scary in darkness? Well, I wanted to be able to have suspense you could see coming. I've always loved scenes where, characters like hunkered down and, you have, non-visual cues around you, right? Where, you can hear sounds, you can hear breathing or something like that, something scratching on the walls. And so I was like, okay, what kind of techniques can I use to sort of sell these creatures? And then what's that going to turn them into? And I was like, well, most of the time light's comforting. So, what if I try to make light the thing that people are scared of? And so, that was kind of the origin point of the Shimmer people for it, where she's like watching for this purple glow among the buildings, before she commits to it. And then, I wanted to put all sorts of evidence of things that could have happened. So, you have the boot with the bones jutting out of it. You have the grill with the skulls on it, the melted jungle gem. And, I really wanted to give myself as many tools to work with for that opening scene hook. Then from there, I was like, okay, so I've got this girl trying to navigate the apocalypse. I figured out, it's like, okay, so she's left her sister behind for this. So, I can also pivot back to her sister. And I was like, okay, but I do think I want to give a little bit of backstory because a lot of my books are actually really linear. So, Mobius Door, of course, is a multi-point of view piece. So some of the point of views do overlap, but there's no flashbacks anywhere in that book. You get a couple characters who mentally digress a little bit thinking about something, but otherwise it's everything that happens is moving forward. Gollitok has a couple hallucinations, but literally, it's first person present tense.
Right.
It just keeps driving forward. And, Extinction Dream, of course, it looks like it's written in two layers, but part of the trick of that book is that everything is in the present. So even though you think half the book's in for flashback for 2/3 of the runtime, all of that's actually happening in the active narrative present. So this one, though, I did decide, I was like, okay, so I do want to show how these girls got here. And then when I started thinking about that, though, and I've got to be careful because there is spoiler territory, but there is a major couple of twists at the end of the book, and the nature of the relationship between the girls on the what I actually call it the overworld and underworld narratives. So the overworld is where the girls are outside the shelter exploring the ruins of the neighborhood. The underworld story is them in the shelter. And of course, there is a trick to the relationship between those two things, of course. So once I kind of figured that out, the rest largely fell into place.
Nice. So I always love this question because I always get some nice, fun reactions to it. So, but of all the books that you've written, what would you say is your favorite?
In Those Fading Stars. Haven't mentioned
your
that
short
one
story collection.
Yeah, it's my short story collection. A couple of different reasons. One, the opening short story of the collection is called Before You Fade Away. And I wrote that the night after we learned of some incredibly disturbing news about something that had happened to our son. And it was just an absolutely devastating stretch. It actually literally was part of what defined our personal lives for about 2 years. I wrote that story just as sort of a reaction to what I was feeling at the time. It's not in any way about what happened, but it was just like, okay, I need to write a story that's going to encapsulate this feeling. And I still think it's actually the single best thing I've ever written. But also just in general, that story or that collection has, it was such a playground. There was so much room to explore. I have, some of my favorite concepts are in there, things I would have loved to maybe turn into books, but I didn't. So I've got a couple who's on a budget intergalactic honeymoon. And they
love that story.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. And they're exploring this planet's surface, except everything's behind paywalls, including the tools that they need to survive. And when their bank account runs dry, things really get crazy. I've got a story about a guy who has an interdimensional hole open up in his stomach, and he starts vomiting up. It never explains what they are exactly in the story, because it's meant to be more of a horror story. But they're intergalactic refugees, and he's their savior. But they're also ripping them apart from the inside out as they're trying to escape from his body, because they just happen to materialize there. Then, the last story in the collection is told through the point of view of a lamp and a bench post watching a nuclear apocalypse. It was just, it's like all of the concepts are meaningful to me. So there's it's not just me being silly, but there was so much room to have fun with it. And it was kind of like a release vent in a lot of ways, because I was writing these stories all throughout writing Gollitok and Extinction Dream. And it was just, I'd be writing something that was really intense and stressful. And then I'd be like, you know what? I need a day off. And so I'd just churn out a short story. And so that's actually my favorite book, which is unfortunate, because it's actually my least selling of all of my titles. It's gotten the least, except for poetry, of course, because nobody buys that. But no, it's a lot of fun, and it's one of those. If I can find a way to revitalize it one day, I will.
Nice. All right. Now, so kind of shifting gears a little bit. So we talked about the author stuff. So now I want to dive a little bit into the publishing stuff. Because you started publishing with Wicked House, but then some things happened, and now you are co-owner and co-editor-in-chief. And so I do want to talk about some of the, again, like that little black box stuff that as us authors we don't really get to see. But now you are knee deep in all that. So what made you want to take the step into the publishing world?
So that's a fun question. To be fair, I had done some editing work before. I don't mean just like editing manuscripts. I was the senior poetry editor for Symposium magazine. We did 2 full issues together with the rest of the crew. We were working on a third before I got actually bogged down in publications, and my friend Allie got bogged down in starting a new agency, all that kind of stuff. So, I'd had some experience doing operations management. I learned a good bit during that process of sort of the solicitation, review, and selection process. And at the same time, as I was writing the short stories for In Those Fading Stars, I was also really active in publishing short fiction. So, I got about 25 stories out in short fiction venues, some of which I'm pretty proud of. But in the process of doing that, though, I wanted to get to know the short story market better than I did. And so I signed on as a screening reader for a magazine called the Chaubert Family Circus. And it was a fun little absurd, dark magazine. It was like sort of like dark speculative absurdist work. And it was really fun to read for. I read a couple dozen pieces for it, and just started getting used to learning tastes. But then they decided that they were going to wind down because sales just weren't there. And at the same time, though, I'd been submitting dark science fiction stories to this magazine called The Dread Machine. And they were really, really cool. I'm still on their Discord, actually, and I got to know some people pretty well through that one. And they had a fantastic community built around themselves. And I read as a screening reader for them some just absolutely fantastic pieces. I learned a lot about publishing magazines through that, more than I actually did when I was, helping publish a magazine, ironically enough. But because I also learned a little bit more about the financial side of it, which was something I hadn't learned before. And so that side of it was already, so I kind of started building that interest. And then through those connections, I started editing a few manuscripts. And so I did a few freelance jobs for folk who were members of that Discord. At that point, Patrick was trying to accelerate his pace a little bit. He had a couple of fantastic editors, but, sometimes they'd fall behind. And he literally just had just enough people to kind of keep things, if everything went perfectly, on track. And so, at one point, I just randomly, honestly, I needed a little extra cash. And I was like, hey, if you ever need somebody to edit a manuscript for you, I'd love to give it a shot. I've got some pretty good experience, at least from teaching and that kind of stuff. And I've done a little bit of direct, professional work. And he was like, well, I don't know. And honestly, he gave me a really, really cheap fucking wage for it, because he was paying Renee DeCamillis and Heather Doherty about 5 cents a word, which is pretty common, or 0.005 cents. Sorry, which is pretty common for indie authors. And so because he wasn't certain about my ability at it, he offered me 0.004. And I was just like, well, fuck it. I'm going to do I'll do a book. I'd love to start building this. And it was a really positive experience. I did Never Dead by Joe Scipione. And, he was great to work with. It's a fun book. I enjoyed working on it. And, from there, I started kind of pursuing a couple other avenues and, ended up doing, I think, 3 books for Patrick, including Forever Fields by Josh Hill. And then I did Phobia Experiments for MJ Mars. Then in the process, though, I ended up kind of starting to talk with Mark Tullius of, the Try Not to Die books. Mm-hmm. First, I wrote Try Not to Die in the Shadowlands for him. And, he had signed an absolute buttload of books. And, he was like, well, I could really use some help editing through this. We had a conversation, where we really hit it off with each other at, TBR Con. We were tabled side by side. We literally talked like a huge chunk of it. And I ended up, agreeing to start editing a couple of titles for him. And we built a really fantastic relationship. So I've done, I want to say 5 for him now. And then a whole bunch of his Satan short stories. And I've got more of them coming in too. And in the process, he also hooked me up with this extreme horror press out of Germany that was trying to translate an author into English. So I got to work with her a couple of times as well, Simone Trojan. And so I started working there too. So, I'm building a pretty decent resume of books. Certainly enough experience that I feel like, I've been able to work through steadily. And so at the same time, Patrick had signed Wicked House with this distributing company called IPG. And that sucked. It's one of those things that on the surface, it looked fucking fabulous. It sounded like such a great deal. And it wasn't. But the more I've learned about it since really digging into it as owner of the press, man, that deal was terrible. But anyways, so Patrick, though, was getting really burned out by it because, he really genuinely cared about the press, like a lot. And it really bothered him that he felt like he was letting down the authors, that he'd made a decision that was just nothing but problems. He really was, worried about what it was going to do to the press when it was supposed to be sort of the big level up that would take the press to the next level. And so, as he started getting more and more burned out about it, at first a couple of times I was like, hey, you need to, if you need some help with this, maybe we can work something out. Maybe I can offload some of your responsibility because, I was kind of starting to get interested in learning a little bit more about the mechanics of the industry. He was like, oh, no, I can do it. It's fine. And, he ended up sort of, asking me to help him with a few small things. So, I was running the Patreon for a while, handling a couple of other elements as well. And then, little while later, I was like, he was still, he was even more stressed out. And I was like, and he was literally talking about possibly, selling the press. And he'd had this, he'd even had like this one half-assed offer for, basically somebody who was trying to lowball to buy a struggling press for cheap. And, he dismissed that. But, at one point he was frustrated. And I was like, I mean, if you're going to sell the press, you could always just sell it to me. And we kind of joked around about it a little bit. It was really more of an offhand comment than anything else. But, I don't know, about 2 months later, he reached out to me and was like, hey, you remember when we were talking and you said something about buying the press? How serious were you? And I was like, well, at the time I was joking, but now is this a serious conversation now? And so, we started kind of talking about this. But, one thing I was very aware of is, I had pretty limited financial resources. So, like my purchase capital was pretty low. And so, we were trying to talk through like ways we could make it work. Maybe I could jump in as a 50-50 partner. Maybe I could buy it and then he'd get phased out through some clear process. And then, I guess also at the same time, he'd had a similar conversation with Joe Hempel. And, but Joe had the exact same problems that I did, where neither of us had enough money to buy the press, especially to buy it and then run it. And that was a big concern too. It's like, okay, so if I give you all of the cash that I have, how do I make the next books?
Right.
And then, it was like, okay, well, me and Joe combined, I'd met Joe and, we talked in a few different capacities. And so, we actually had a pretty good start to the conversations right at the beginning. But we also were still like, this is an expensive venture. We want to do this right. We don't want to like eke by and then collapse like so many places do. And then, Joe reached out to the Athon folk and wanted to ask them for some advice about how to structure the deal, about what to do to make it profitable. And that's when they were like, well, we've been trying to figure out a good way to branch into horror for quite a while. And so, what if we enter into this deal? And at that point, that's pretty much what how it got locked in. At that point, it just that was a game changer for the conversation. It's been fantastic because there's a lot to learn from them.
That's awesome. So when you're talking on the kind of the publishing side, and when you're looking at submissions, what makes a manuscript like immediately stand out?
So, that's a fun question because right now, me and Joe, eventually we may consider bringing on screeners, but right now we review each and every submission, and so. And we both look at it. We converse about them all. There's several things that we do weigh in. Now, I will say up front, we have solicited some of the books. So there are some people that we've asked because they had proven track records. And basically, we trust that through our own editorial additions that we can definitely work with what they do. So, like just for example, one of the people I'm most excited to work with is Andrew Najberg. We've got a book coming down the pipe from him at some point in the future. And it's just, I'm really looking forward to it. I love his work. I've read several books by him and everyone just has a standard of quality that I'm really excited about. So sometimes we do reach out to authors who just have, just strong records. But, when we're looking at the submission pile, so one, the cover letter really does matter. You'd be surprised how many people have just severely undermined their opportunity. I had one person who wrote their cover letter through the voice of one of their characters. And like, it was an entertainingly written piece. It almost could have been a short story, but I was reading this thing and I was like, wait, like, is this the story? Is this what the story's about? Like, what am I actually looking at? What am I, I literally couldn't tell what they were trying to pitch me in the end because they had tried taking such an unusual avenue for it. I've had other ones that, just don't do what we asked. They send us really strange things. I've had people I've had a couple that just like are really conversational and rambly. And like, I literally, I get to the end and I'm like, so what kind of horror book is this supposed to be? Like, and that's actually the first piece of advice though, is like, some of those nuts and bolt things really, really matter. Like, a great example is we signed, a little group of Gothic horror stories that came through. And I'm actually really excited about it because, Gothic horror is fantastic. It's one of my favorite subgenres, but it's also a really popular one, right? So it's one we're looking at, and we're looking at, sort of our publication history and what we've got coming down the pipe. And so it's like, okay, so, Blaine writes Gothic horror, at least somewhat, his is kind of like midway through Gothic and folk in some ways.
Right. Yep.
It's like, okay, so I'd love to bring in a couple Gothic books. And so Then we signed 3 in short succession. And so now it's like, okay, so, unless a Gothic pitch is really exceptional, we're probably going to slow down on signing Gothic books until we see how these perform. If these become like a sub-market that we're kind of rallying around, okay, maybe we'll do more right now. But because we had a bunch of them come in, we picked the 3 we thought were most appealing. And now it's like, okay, now we've got to wait and see on this subgenre. I'm about to sign a couple space horror ones right now, actually. And so, it's probably going to be like, okay, let's pause on the space horror. Let's see how these go and let's bring them through markets. So being really clear though, and what is scary about your book is an absolute priority. Some people will put teasers in there and they'll try to, just tell you a third of their story when they're supposed to give you the full synopsis pitch. And, you hit the end, you're like, so wait, is that where you ended the book? Or are you just not telling me what the story's about? And I mean, we had one that was really promising and we emailed them, because it wasn't clear. Like I liked I liked other things in their cover letter and I emailed them. It's like, okay, what exactly, is the kind of horror we're looking at? And their response didn't give me a straight answer. And so it was like, okay, I'm done with this conversation. If you can't explain this to me, it's just, at that point you start to be like, okay, how is this person going to be to work with? If we have an editor who needs clarification on something, are they going to give me like these sidelong answers that don't get me anywhere? What kind of process is this going to be? So yeah, following those guidelines, both tells us a lot about how clear your vision of your book is. And it tells us a lot about what you're like to work with. But then, really though, beyond that, the next 2 criteria, I do look for a horror book that on the one hand, it does have to be clearly horror. We try not to do things that are too gray about whether they're horror or not. We are a horror press. We're not a thriller press. We've got a couple thrillers that were signed under Patrick, and they're great books. So don't get me wrong. I'm not like regretting that we have them. Otherwise, though, yeah, we're really trying to stay out of that pure thriller zone, like the action thriller, that kind of stuff. That's really not our speed. But so I do want there to be something that clearly fits us in terms of just being a horror book. But then also, I want to see, I want to know what's unique about your book. If you are going to pitch me a werewolf book, for example, I have to know why I'm going to read this werewolf instead of, why won't I go reread James Cain's My Pet Werewolf instead? What is the value of this particular one? So having that emphasis on what makes your book unique among your subgenre is really important. First 50 is huge. When I'm sitting down to read that, if the voice isn't strong at the beginning, that's going to be a huge strike against you. I really do want there to be something defining happening pretty early on. And I don't need like, a body on the first page, but, I need to know what the hook is that's going to pull the readers in. If somebody opens up a sample on Amazon, what is it that's going to make them be like, okay, I'm buying this ebook, or I'm going to download this on KU. A weak first 50, especially a first 50 that lacks tension is going to be something that really, really undermines the submission.
Gotcha. Interesting. So what does a small press do to market a book after signing?
So, a lot of it is, we do have, especially through Athon, a lot of experience with running ads. Just for example, Athon, they do a very significant amount of business with Amazon. It is their primary core. And Amazon, as a result, has a marketing team assigned to it. And they coordinate together for advertising efforts. Really, we have a combination of a marketing crew that is, effective and working with us and working with Amazon. We have, an advertising budget that is significant. We also do, a number of things, like if nothing else, we definitely do not, we don't spare production expense. I'm incredibly proud to say that all of our books are great looking books. They stand out on tables at events. Yeah. And, we always make sure that, the cover is strong, that you're well formatted, that, everything looks polished and professional. We do offer, we do some author coaching as well. I have a constant stream of conversations going with Wicked House authors, in various capacities, mostly one-on-one though. I do offer some generalized, recommendations, sometimes strategic things. I'll occasionally put up a post in our private group that talks to folk about some of the nuts and bolts of how things like the Amazon algorithms work, how sales algorithms and advertisement algorithms work, to help folks sort of see some ways that they can sort of shape their own promotion to help further their own chances. Ultimately, there's a few things that we can do. We can throw money at ads. We can make a great looking book. We can try to get you reviews. One thing I'm doing now is building active relationships with several different magazines. So, right now we have a couple of authors who are being considered for reviews at Cemetery Dance, for example. Memento Mori's published multiple reviews of our work. And, we're looking to kind of continue building in that direction as well. So we also have a private ARC reader group. We don't do large volume of ARC yet. Typically, we do try to keep those numbers down a little bit. It's really easy for authors to cannibalize their own sales too aggressively through heavy ARC campaigns. I've had a few conversations with folk who definitely feel like they may have sabotaged their own launch that way. I feel like I'm one of them, actually. I think that's part of what hurt in those Fading Stars, actually, was I did a very heavy ARC push on it, and I think that actually ended up undermining its launch momentum. But we do have an ARC reader group. And then, we cycle through a number of different promotional efforts as well. We've worked with, Goodreads giveaways, and we've worked with BookBubs, and we've done, what else have we done? We've done a few different similar, promotional items. So it kind of, there's a number of things that we work with. Some things work better than others. So for example, I'm still pretty happy with how BookBubs do. I don't feel like it's quite what it used to be back in 2023 or 22, but it's still a solid service. We've done NetGalley a little bit, but honestly, NetGalley I've heard called the 3 Factory, and I think that's actually really accurate. Where there are a lot of reviewers on NetGalley who sort of arbitrarily review things harshly. I've seen some of the glowingest reviews on there still give a book a smacking 3 stars. And it's just like, could you say one thing that gave you the reason for that? Instead of at least a 4, cause, from where I'm sitting, that looks like a 5-star review. But, we do that as well. Of course, we have a mailing list that's building. Our own books, of course, advertise internally other Wicked House releases. So if you were to buy Eat the Light, for example, and read through the end, you'd find ads and like links on the ebook and ads in the print version for Judith Sonnet's The Dwelling. And usually at least one of our other titles. So, we also work with internally with our titles to, if we have like a book that's a smash success, it's going to advertise a couple other people particularly well, so, that's, there's a lot of different strategies. We do some mailing list sharing as well. So like, every once in a while we'll reach out and be like, hey, could you spotlight this author, in your mailing list, this. Again, there's no one strategy. There's just a lot of different things that we do to try to maximize the visibility of each title.
Interesting. So I did have a whole bunch of questions, but then I started looking at how long this interview is going. I don't want to keep you for too terribly long. And I do have some stuff at the end that, that I typically do that I definitely want to get to. But one more question on the publishing side. So what do you find is the most rewarding part of helping another author's book come to life?
That's a fun one. All of it, honestly, I really, really love publishing people's books. I've got a growing shelf right up here below my alien cloak collection. And, I love the hell out of having all of those books. We've reached tens of thousands of readers already. We've had some books that have already done some really, really strong sales, gotten into the hands of, 5,000 people, something like that. It's like that alone is just a wonderful feeling, especially knowing that, so many people are also being entertained. A lot of folk find times to be fairly challenging right now. And, it's something we can do to make life better for people. Working with the authors, of course, I do love editing books. I've been able to, I've had some really great relationships emerge from the folk I've worked with. I really enjoyed working with, Judith Sonnet. Boris Basic was just amazing to work with. I'm really excited about their books coming out. I'm editing a book by Caleb Jones right now, which is really fantastic. It's going to be one of our longer titles, but I've got a queue already with I'm going to be hopping into Deborah Castaneda's Tormenta next. I love her work, so it's honestly super exciting just to get to work with some of these folk. They're all people whose work I admire, and it's just great to be part of the process. But then also, really, I think one of the biggest things is coming back to how I kind of got started here. I had a lot of agents do things like, I had one, for example, this is the story I usually tell. They loved Extinction Dream. They wanted me to restructure the beginning to speed up the pacing a little bit, and they made a couple of other recommendations. And so, I spent a month rewriting the book for them, and they ghosted me. I sent it back into them, changes made, and just never heard back from it. And it was just like, that was really frustrating. It was really disappointing because I was very optimistic about that one, and I loved the changes I made too. And then, working with the press that started with Gollitok, where they're like, I wouldn't hear from them for months at a time. And then when I did, it was really just kind of minimal. And, I wasn't happy with production value. I wasn't happy with editing. And so, things like that also sort of, they weighed on me. And knowing what it was like to have a great experience with Patrick and Wicked House, where, editing was fantastic. I worked with an editor that, I was just like, wow, okay, so this is what an editor should be, so basically making sure that our authors don't have the same negative experiences that I had, that's a huge part of it too. I know how important the dream of getting a book out is. It's something that I think for the vast majority of us is, it means a lot to us. It's not just about making money off of it. It's about telling the stories we want to tell. It's about the work we put into creating them. And, to some extent, I appreciate having the role of safeguarding that for the authors who sign with us. And that's something that's very important to me. I think in some ways, maybe it's even the same thing that appeals to me about teaching, where it's, I like watching over things and making sure that things are turning out okay for folk. Unlike my books.
Things don't turn out well for folks in your books. Well, and I know from the author standpoint, I've had, a handful, books so far come out, and I've got 3 on the way here in the next 7 months. So I have a little stack, it's kind of all releasing at one time almost. And I know that, every time it comes out, it's a whole new brand new experience, and it's excitement every time. And, there's being at events and, as being an author, and that excitement, if you can carry it on, you can do sales. And that's, the other day I was giving a presentation for Joe Meinhardt's Masterminds group, and was talking about how, just in that excitement, or, it's contagious. And if you are, if you keep using the word excited, if you're very excited about your book, then you make the, you make the customer excited about it. It is a contagious experience.
For sure. It's like I just did an event last weekend, Knoxville Book Fest, and I had a great event. It was really cool. I got to talk to James Dashner, who was super freaking nice. He's the dude who wrote The Maze Runner, and seems like a total class act. He was a delightful person, but then there's people who just literally sit there dourly at their table, and they're just staring at their phone. They don't even look up at people who are walking by, and it's just like, why are you here? You look miserable. And if you're that miserable, why is somebody gonna come up to you and strike up the conversation that's going to sell them a book or two? I don't know. It's just like, that's one of those things that like, I don't understand. It's like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to want to do that. I'm going to have a good time doing it.
So, but yeah, you just, when you were talking about, kind of that kind of dream come true from as a publisher, being able to do that for authors, it just made me think of all that, the excitement of having that new release and how, you just, with every, like I said, with every one of them, I usually end up taking that day off of work, when I have a book release and,
Nice.
I'm posting about it online. I'll do a live event. I'll do just some kind of like Facebook Live or something that day. And I'll do a reading and answer questions about the book. And, I make it an event, and cause it is something it's awesome. And not a lot of people get to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Kind of shifting gears again. So I started the Night Crew podcast as a spinoff to my own series, The Night Crew, which is all about, a team of monster hunters. So one of the things I always ask the authors, making sure I kind of ground this interview somewhat in monsters. What is always, what is your favorite monster? So, Mr. Najberg, your favorite monster is?
I've got to just easier to show and tell, I've got my safely contained xenomorph specimen with the face hugger on the outside. And it's, Alien and, the rest of the franchise, even the newer ones, it's always been, it's my comfort films. I can literally just put them on any day of the week and I will not be tired of them. And some of it is, I like the feel and atmosphere. I like that kind of gritty, dirty future feel. But then I think the aesthetic of the Alien and the things surrounding it is just so remarkably, for lack of a better word, alien that, it's a truly fascinating vision, I think.
And I definitely agree. So in the whole series, there are some good ones and some bad ones from a movie standpoint. I know you're probably like, no, they're all great, but then like the first two are just absolute classics. The third one is kind of a little iffy. But what about like when they started bringing the Predator stuff in and you kind of had some of the AV? So still a fan through that stuff too? Or is that kind of more like? So
I think AVP1 is actually just fantastic. Now, I'm not saying it's a work of true cinema, but what it is it's a work that has absolutely no illusions about what it is. And if you watch it and you think, okay, I am watching a movie that is basically what I'd expect from a comic book just made into a film, you get exactly what you want out of it, including literally down to the same level of character development. You get the same kind of panel by panel image. You could see the paneling that the director has chosen, where you can you can see how those sort of comic style shots are being presented. And it's just a fun, schlocky movie where aliens fight predators and humans get slaughtered in the middle as, helpless sheep. And it's exactly what you should expect from it, and it delivers. The second one, first off, most people can't really claim to have watched the second one because it's filmed so darkly, you can't actually make out anything that happens on the screen. That movie does suffer significantly.
I do recall that, yeah.
Yes, it suffers badly from being very poorly filmed. But then, it's entertaining schlock. It's a bad B horror movie with a pretty cool skin. And, it has some solid horror moments. I don't shy away from like sort of over the top or brutal body horror. So like the maternity ward scene, I know is upset, bothers a lot of people. And to me, it's just like, oh, that was inventive. I've never seen that before. It's not a great film, but, I put it on probably a dozen times. It's my least watched of all of the titles. I think Prometheus gets more hate than it deserves. I actually think it's a pretty good film.
I was going to ask what your thoughts were on some of the prequel ones. Is it Prometheus? And then there's one right after. What was it?
Covenants.
Yeah.
Prometheus gets a lot more hate than it deserves, and I think some of it is just because there are a couple of aesthetic choices that do frustrate people. The characters taking off their helmets early on, Ridley Scott's answer was that he felt it'd be easier and more effective for his actors to perform without them. And, I know sort of a bit of Hollywood movie magic, and I can kind of dismiss that. But no, I think, one thing that's really interesting is a lot of people criticize the characters and their decisions, but, I've always had the theory that I'm pretty sure every character was hired specifically because they're bad at what they do. I think the main character, because it's about somebody who is arrogant enough to think that they can join the gods in immortality. And the thing is when somebody is powerful enough to seek that kind of power, he's not going to share that power with other people with him. And so I actually think that Wayland's plan in that film was that he hired people who would look credible on paper, but would be bad at their jobs because he expected the entire expedition but him to die, and that his robot would protect him and shepherd him through into the engineers so he could become one of them. It's a mythological story. It fits the themes of Prometheus, actually.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so, if you approach it from that point of view, there are quite a few things about it that iron out very quickly. But no, and, Covenant, it's funny because I read the novelization of Covenant. The novelizations are always drawn from the scripts. And, if you also watch the deleted scenes of Covenant, you see that there were all these little moments that were trimmed out. And the novelization pushes it into it even further. And it's funny because for some reason, in the final cut of that movie, Ridley Scott decided to trim out a lot of little character moments that really help you understand why the characters make the decisions that they do. So, for example, he had originally scripted a scene where they did air tests to see whether or not it was safe for a landing party to go down. And he was just like, well, yeah, but people want to see, I'm filming this like a horror movie. I want a horror audience. This is not a science fiction audience. And so people don't want the dry science side. They want the horror side. And obviously, I think he misjudged that. I think he didn't realize quite how much people like the hard sci-fi feel of the Alien movies. Yeah, there's all these little things he trimmed out where, character motivations are better fleshed out in the original scripts and novelizations and stuff that I think he just made some miscalculations about what the final product needed to be. But otherwise, honestly, I think it's also still a pretty interesting movie of its own right. I think the interplay of the androids is actually rather philosophically fascinating. I think the concepts behind it are actually really cool. So, yeah, I even like Alien 4 for the weird, misshapen child that it is. Even Alien 3, it made mistakes. Mistakes were made. And there's a reason why David Fincher stripped his name off the project. But, at the same time, I actually just watched that 3 days ago. And, what's his name? Charles Dance gives an amazing performance as Clemens. And then Charles Dutton is incredibly charismatic as Dylan. So, you do have a couple just truly vibrant performances that stand out in the film. The cinematography in a lot of cases is truly beautiful on that one. So, it's deeply flawed. And I think it made some devastating decisions for the larger franchise. But at the same time, there's still merit in it.
So what do you think keeps bringing audiences or the filmmakers back to the characters of like the xenomorph and the facehugger? Like what is the draw and the appeal that it keeps you wanting to watch it hundreds of times?
Well, okay, so I can list a couple of very specific things on that. First off, the xenomorph itself, its design and life cycle. So while it is inspired by some of the more exotic life on Earth, the jaws sort of reflect anglerfish, for example, and certain types of eels. The impregnation cycle reflects a couple types of hornets and a couple of types of, like botflies and things like that. So we see some of that in it. But the actual visual design of the alien and sort of the environment it builds around itself is there's nothing like it, especially when I was watching it in the 1980s. It was staggeringly and starkly different than anything else out there. And everything else that's come after that sort of is like it has drawn directly from it. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a visionary aesthetic that came from H.R. Giger that I think it's kind of unmatched in horror in a lot of ways because it literally like it looks alien, like, it looks like it's something truly out of this world. And, in a way that's nightmarish. I mean, it face rapes people and, literally obliterates their body as a form of birth. It's pretty demented and twisted as a creature, but also it sort of reflects this darkly cruel cosmos that I think, sort of underlies the Alien series and is part of it, the horror of it. But then on top of that, though, I think there's a strong appeal to the retrofuturistic aesthetic that gets established throughout the Alien movies, especially Alien, Aliens, also successfully in Romulus as well, where you have that really gritty lived-in future, also echoes things like Blade Runner and stuff like that, where, they have like crazy technology, but, life still kind of looks shitty. And I think there's something we can really empathize with that. As a whole, I'm a pretty, in real life, I'm actually a very positive person and very upbeat. But, I think the world is a hard place. I think a lot of us, sure, we see TV shows where you have these really polished and pretty environments, but I think most of us, we go outside and, I live in a relatively nice neighborhood. We're sort of like kind of almost middle class, but, one day I was driving out of our neighborhood and there's a sort of downslope and the car in front of me just pulls off to the side and just dumps a bag of trash out their window. And it's just like, that's the world right there. Even if you want it to be really nice and you try to take care of it, somebody else is just going to shit on it for you. And I think that alien world building that they do is, I think it really kind of captures that. And I think people find it really relatable that, there's an optimism to it. It's cool as hell that people are traveling to all the distant corners of the universe that, that they've accomplished all this, but then also, it's still a mess.
Well, and it is funny when you start getting into some of the sci-fi movies, there tends to be two very extremes. You do have either those that are that kind of Blade Runner-esque or something where everything's very dark and very dreary, and it seems like nobody knows how to turn a light on, and it's like the seedy side of everything. But then you have kind of the flip side of that, where there's a lot of sci-fi movies where everybody's walking around in like their sheer little robes, and everything is clean and beautiful and perfect. It's like you. In a lot of sci-fi, you get like it's like one or the other. It's either everything's pristine and beautiful and clean and marble, or everything is seedy and dark and dreary.
Yeah, I will say one that I think did a good job actually getting the middle ground was Firefly. It is dirty, but also they still do have some bright and dazzling things in it.
I haven't seen that in a long time.
Time for a rewatch.
I know, right?
What's time for a rewatch? They have a new show coming out, like an animated show.
Oh, do they?
Yes, with the whole original voice cast.
Nice. Right now, I'm powering through Buffy again.
Always worth the rewatch. Where are you at?
So right now I'm only in season 2. I've been diving into this novel and I'm writing. I'm in like 88 something thousand words right now. So nice. I've been plowing through it. And so I've been doing that and trying to catch up on these podcasts. So I haven't done.
How dare you do original, unique work when you could be rewatching Buffy?
I know. How dare I? Well, and I always joke because I got to when it first, I got to like season 3 or 4 before I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. So I never actually finished the series. And so finally I was like, all right, screw it. I'm starting back over. And we're watching it. Like the last episode I watched was the introduction to Spike. So
that's a good one.
Yeah. So I'm still very early, but yeah, I got a balance between, actually writing and doing stuff I like to do and, making stories. So, all right. So outside of writing, and the publishing and all that, so what are your other hobbies? I know you do a lot of gameplay, and, I know you also have a board game coming out.
Yeah, the Kickstarter actually just closed down about 5 hours ago, I want to say, for The Bad Side of Town, cooperative serial killer themed board game with a dark sense of humor. Designed it with John Cohn and published it through Beyond Killer Games. Was really excited about that. That was a 2-year project. I do play a good bit of D&D. then I collect magic cards. That's one way I'm a total nerd. I've played since 1995, and I don't really play a ton. Like, I'm planning on teaching my kids how to play it, but I still like collecting the cards. It gives me a good sense of nostalgia. I do a lot of drawing as well. Like, that's a painting of mine in the background there. So I painted for a long time. I do a lot of pen and ink work, pastel work. That kind of comes and goes depending on how busy I am, though. Recently, I'll admit, writing and game design and publishing stuff has been kind of taking over everything. My son and I play Grounded together. So just a video game. We play Minecraft together. Me and John Cohn and Andrew Van Wy and Ben Farthing are in what we call the Boo Crew. For a long time, we were live streaming the game Baldur's Gate. We played that for a year, almost every Monday, finally beating it right before Christmas. And now we switched to playing a game called Grounded. But we actually decided to take a little break from live streaming it so that we could talk shop a little bit more. All of us are sort of neck deep in individual projects. And so, we figured that would be a great way to sort of double up on having some fun together, and then also getting a little bit of work done. But no, I'm an avid gamer. I'm an avid sports. I used to play sports pretty aggressively. And then I did, boxed for a little while, and I did Taekwondo for almost 2 years. But then, I'm trying to get my son into, playing some Frisbee golf with me. Me and my wife. Oh yeah, it's fantastic. My wife and I are threatening to take up pickleball this summer. And I think the biggest thing is I'm not good at being bored. I'm a very restless person in that respect. Like, I don't sit idly very easily. And so, I'm always doing something. I used to write music pretty extensively. I've been in a couple of bands, and I've sequenced music for, 15 years. And I still sometimes compose some music for book trailers and stuff like that. It's
Wait, what? So you were in band. So what do you play? I didn't know you played an instrument.
So I play drums. I do sing. That was always my role in the bands I've been in, was the front man.
So wait, you give me crap about karaoke, and you are a singer as well? Oh, ShiverCon's going to be so fun.
But I don't karaoke.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But no, but also, just to be fair, I'm actually typically a death metal vocalist. And so it's not exactly conducive to most karaoke settings. I can do a few.
I'll talk to Allie and Brandon. We will make it work.
Oh yeah, we'll see. But no, and I play a little guitar. I learned a little bit of keyboards. That never clicked with me. I have a bass guitar in my office at work that I'll screw around on sometimes too. My favorite, though, honestly, was always sequencing. So I work with I love working with software and loops and things like that, and building tracks that way as well.
Awesome. All right. So, as we're kind of wrapping stuff up. So any lasting advice for aspiring authors?
So what I think my favorite is just a reminder that, when you study something like at a university, like you're in creative writing, or you're in English, you're in like law school, or, chemistry, you call them disciplines. And I think that's a really important word for people to have in mind. And it's not to say that we need to be rigid about what we do. We should have a lot of fun with it. Like right now I'm working on a horror comedy that's it's the dumbest thing I've ever written, but it's just an absolute blast. And it's, it's honestly been kind of a pure joy to work on. But no, the thing is, though, is what makes it work is that I sit down every day just about, and work on it for about an hour. And sometimes I don't want to. Sometimes I have a migraine, and I'll still sit down and I'll work on it. Sometimes I do 500 words. Sometimes I do 1,500 or 2,000 words. But just keeping doing that over and over and over. The book's 125 now. Going to be about 180 when it's done. So this is a chunker. But no, the thing that makes all of the difference is just sticking with it, making yourself do it even when you don't want to. It's not about feeling inspired. It's about building craftsmanship and becoming good at your skills so that even when you feel like shit, you can still do a solid job at it. And then you can always polish it up later when you're feeling fantastic. But keeping that movement going, not letting it stagnate is absolutely huge. And that's also true for selling your book too. It's kind of like we were talking about. You're at an event, like I'm on my feet the whole event. I maybe sit down for a minute or two just to breathe for a second, but otherwise I stay on my feet even when the room is empty. I make eye contact with every single person who will meet my eyes. I greet every person who will talk to me. I ask every person what they like to read or something along those lines just to start with the conversation with them. And sometimes I'll tell them about my books. Other times I just chat with them for a couple minutes and then just be like, all right, it was great talking to you today. And you have to stick with that too, though. Like books don't just sell themselves overnight. It takes a sustained push and energy, especially early on. There's no right way to make a name for yourself, but you do have
There's a whole bunch of wrong ways.
That too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, every single one of those ways, though, that works, takes time and effort. If you're the person who's the social media wizard, you still have to post every day, multiple times a day to hit those spots in the algorithm. You have to engage with the people who respond to you. If that's your method, that's what you got to do. If you want to run ads, you've got to pay attention to those metrics very carefully. You have to check them every day. You have to try to understand what's driving them. You have to tinker. You have to mess with. You don't just hit things on autopilot and assume they'll work. If you want to hustle to book events, you got to make a lot of events if you want to sell enough books to really make it worth your while. Doing one book event a year is great. It's a great way to break the ice. But if that's your thing, if that's how you want to move your copies, you've got to find a way to hit up 10 local cons in the course of a year. That way you build a real audience in the local area. Because ultimately, no matter what you do, nothing you do, unless you just have that crazy viral explosion, lightning bolt stroke of luck, everything you do reaches some readers, and some readers is never enough. You need to have 100 piles of some readers. And so you just got to keep pushing in all sorts of different directions and just do everything you can.
Yeah. 100% agree. When you were talking about the, being there, putting, butt in the chair each morning, we're creatures of habit. And the more you make it a habit, then your mind, your body will adjust, and it'll make it be a habit. It'll put yourself in that, and it'll get easier and easier and easier to get into the mindset you need to get into. Even on days when you don't really want to, you almost then can't help yourself but do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the thing is too, is like habits do form fairly quickly. So you'll get some early success, after a few weeks of doing it. So, kind of being persistent does have some early payoff, I think, where you start to build that momentum. But if you really want to get to that level of craft, you also have to have patience for a couple of years. Everybody's pace is going to be different. Sometimes you'll have your first book get out there faster, but no matter what, if you want to be at the peak of your skill, if you want to be really proficient at what you do, it does take years of practice to get there. Now, what makes that fun is that, sure, sometimes you'll get a book out quickly. You'll get, maybe you can publish in magazines to also get those little boosts in between. But, just, remembering that just because even when you have some early success, that you're not done, that you haven't just you've not completed your journey. You keep taking the journey. And the longer you take the journey, the better at it you get usually.
Agreed. All right. Well, as we're wrapping stuff up, so where can my listeners learn more about you? Where can we find your books, all that kind of stuff?
Everything's in Amazon, of course, the great war chest of books. But that is the easiest way to find me. You can definitely reach me, of course, through most social media avenues. I'm most active on Facebook. You can catch me on TikTok and Instagram. I'm on Discord as well. You can kind of find me on Twitter, though I haven't logged in there in a long time. But, you can also hit www.andrewnajberg.com, or you can go to www.wickedhouse.com. Either way are also perfectly great avenues.
All right. Well, and I'll make sure and get all the various links from you, and I'll put those in the show notes to make it easier for people to, be able to click on and just find everything right there. So, but, so with that, I, appreciate you hanging out with me for a little while. It's, great chatting and some awesome information, both about your books and about the publishing world of things. So yeah, like I said, I appreciate you hanging out and chatting with me for a while.
Thanks so much for having me on, man. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, you as well. Well, that's it for the Night Crew podcast and my conversation with Andrew Najberg. I have links to where you can find Andrew in the show notes. Follow him on all the socials and pick up his books. So, if you had a good time, make sure to follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a rating. Hopefully 5 stars. If you want updates on my writing, you can follow me on Facebook and my reader group, Bradrick's Book Crypt. You can find copies of my novels wherever you like to buy books. But if you hop over to my website, bradricks.com, you can purchase signed copies of any of my novels and get yourself a Night Crew podcast t-shirt. I'm Brad Ricks, reminding you to stay out of graveyards after dark, question people who don't show up in mirrors, and always remember, in space, no one can hear you scream. Until next time, keep your curtains drawn, your sense of humor sharp, and your blood inside your body. Thanks for listening.